The hall was made of crystal. That was the first thing every person noticed upon entering the grand chamber of the Supreme Arbiter. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything was pale blue crystal, catching the light and shattering it into 1,000 tiny shards. It was beautiful. It was also cold. Not a cold of temperature, but a cold emanating from silence and detachment. Admiral Yara Asai had walked into this hall 17 times. Each time, she wore her best uniform. Each time, she kept her back straight and her face calm. Each time, she carried a folder filled with documents, evidence, and arguments. And each time, she left with nothing. Today was her 17th time. She stood in the center of the hall, looking up at the curved rows of seats rising in a semicircle above her. On each seat sat a representative of one of the 47 nations of the Great Union. Some were tall and slender, others wide and massive. Some had 4 arms, others lacked visible eyes. But all of them looked at her with the same expression. It wasn't quite boredom. It was something quieter. It was the look people give when they have already decided the answer before the question has been asked. Yara placed her folder on the small lectern in front of her. She had rehearsed this speech for 3 months. She knew every word by heart. She began to speak. She told the council about the threat growing on the distant frontiers. She told them about the signals that Earth's deep space stations had intercepted. Signals unlike any known race. Signals moving in patterns suggesting the approach of something large and organized. She said that Earth's ground forces had done everything they could with the small patrol ships and defensive platforms the Treaty of Vassalage allowed them to build. She said those small ships and platforms would not be enough. She requested, for the 17th time, the reclassification of humanity from level 5 to at least level 3 in the Union's membership rating, which would allow Earth to begin building real warships. She spoke for 12 minutes. She had charts. She had data. She had the recorded testimonies of humanity's 3 best scientists. When she finished, a moment of silence reigned in the hall. Then High Arbiter Sue spoke. Sue was a Brett. The Bretts were the most powerful nation in the Union, and they let everyone know it. They were tall, with dark green scaly skin and flat yellow eyes that seemed never to blink. Sue sat in the highest place in the hall, slightly above the other council members in a chair that was slightly larger than the rest. He had held the post of High Arbiter for 60 years. He had denied humanity's request for reclassification every time. He didn't even look at the charts. The petition, Sue said, his voice level and low. Denied. Yara did not flinch. She had expected this. She had promised herself not to react, but it was difficult. After 17 attempts, it was very difficult. May I ask, she said carefully, on what grounds? Sue finally looked at her. It was a long, slow gaze, the kind a person gives when they don't actually see the other person, but simply stare at the space they occupy. Humans, he said, are impulsive. Your civilization has been engaging in interstellar travel for little more than a century. You are still fighting among yourselves. You make decisions based on emotion, not logic. By all our metrics, you are a young and unstable civilization. To give your people the right to build warships is like giving a child a plasma cutter. It will not end well, not for you, nor for anyone nearby. From the gallery, a sound emerged. It took Yara a moment to realize what it was. It was laughter, not loud, open laughter. It was the quiet, polite laughter of people who find a joke self-evident. She picked up her folder. Her face remained impassive. She said nothing more, because she realized after 17 visits to this hall that there was nothing more to say. The decision had been made before her arrival. It would be made the same way on the 18th time, if there ever was an 18th time. She walked out of the crystal hall, passed through the long corridor and the wide glass doors, and found herself under the cold, white light of the pale sun of Verit Prime. Her aide, a young man named Corporal Danell Carr, was waiting outside. He was 24, and he still believed that everything could change. She saw it in how he looked at her. When she emerged, the small, hopeful tightening of his face asked the question before his mouth could. She shook her head once. His face darkened. "The same reason?" he asked. "The same reason," she said. "We are children. Children are not given weapons." They walked to their transport in silence. On the flight back to the Union Transit Hub, Yara sat alone in her small cabin, reading the briefing again. The signal from the frontiers, the pattern analysis, the projections. She had read it so many times, she could close her eyes and see the numbers without looking at the page. Whatever was out there, It had been moving inward for at least 8 years. It was moving slowly, but it was moving with purpose. 3 Union sensor buoys had gone dark in the last year. Not damaged, not malfunctioning, they just vanished. Clean disappearances, as if something had simply deleted them from existence. Union intelligence had given the source of the signals a name, the Nullorn. No one knew for sure who the Nullorn were. The Union's best analysts believed they were some kind of hive mind, not one creature, but a vast network of connected units that all shared a single consciousness. They moved together, they acted together, they thought together. And judging by the data, they did not communicate with other species. They did not negotiate. They did not stop. The elder races of the Union had been warned about this for years. Yara had included the Nullorn data in every one of her 17 petitions. Each time, the Council acknowledged the information and set it aside. They had their own fleets, powerful ones. The Brett Dominion alone had over 200 warships, each of them a city of metal and weapons. The Allans had their great shield cruisers. The Pelhari had their long-range bombardment platforms. The Union was not defenseless, but Yara read history. She read a lot of history, human history, yes, but also the histories of other peoples available in the Union's public archives. She noticed something that appeared again and again in those stories. Great powers were very good at fighting enemies they expected. They were very bad at fighting enemies they had never imagined. Whatever the Nullorn were, it was not something the Union had imagined before. She closed the briefing folder and stared at the cabin wall. Then, her personal communicator rang. It was a message on a private channel that was not registered in any official system. The sender was identified only by a code Yara immediately recognized. The message consisted of 2 sentences. "We are ready for your inspection, Admiral. Come when you can." Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, was not the most comfortable place. The sky was thick, orange-brown, always dark, and always heavy with nitrogen and methane clouds. The surface temperature was low enough to freeze most liquids. The landscape was by turns flat and jagged, cut by rivers and lakes, not rivers and lakes of water, but of liquid methane. Slow, dark, and cold. No one came to Titan for tourism. The small shuttle that carried Yara down through the atmosphere was not registered with any official unit of the Earth military. The pilot's name was not in any public record. The landing pad they touched down on was not marked on any map. 3 kilometers below the surface of Titan's largest methane sea, carved into the moon's rock by machines that had worked in secret for 4 decades, was the Iro and Ville station. Yara had been here twice before. Both times, it had taken her breath away. It did so again. The main hangar of Iro was enormous. Not large in the sense that airports or warehouses are large. It was vast in the way natural spaces, caves, canyons are vast, things that make a person feel small by comparison. The ceiling was nearly 300 meters above the floor. The walls were bare rock, but covered with cables, pipes, and scaffolding. Everything hummed and moved. Lights hung from above in long rows, casting harsh white light on everything below. And down there, filling most of the huge space, was a ship. It was not yet finished. That was clear. Entire sections of its hull were still open, revealing layers of systems beneath. Power cables, cooling pipes, weapon mounts, structural supports. Teams of engineers in bright yellow suits moved over its surface like tiny insects, working on 100 different tasks simultaneously. Machines rolled and lifted. Sparks flew from welding torches. The sound of it all was constant and deep, a vibration Yara felt in her chest more than she heard with her ears. But even as an unfinished ship, it was something. It wasn't the largest ship Yara had ever seen. The dreadnoughts of the Brett Dominion were larger. The Alun cruisers were longer. But those ships looked like what they were, heavy things built for brute force, intended to suppress with mass and power. This ship looked different. It had a shape that seemed chosen with care, a shape that balanced speed and durability in a way that was hard to explain but easy to feel. There was something about it that made Yara think of a fist, not an open hand waving a weapon, but a fist, dense, ready. The name was not yet written on the hull, but Yara already knew it. HSV Prometheus. She looks good, doesn't she? Director Arvis appeared beside her soundlessly, which was very typical of Arvis. She was a short woman, 63 years old, with silver hair, very closely cropped, and dark eyes that were always a little too alert, always looking at what other people failed to notice. She had spent her entire adult life managing Iroh. She had given up a career in public science, the chance for fame, 2 marriages, and most of her personal freedom to keep this project alive and secret. She had done it because she believed, with a certainty that reached her very bones, that the day would come when humanity would need this ship. Yara looked at her. "Is it soon?" 3 months, Arvis said. "Maybe 3, if we force all teams to work double shifts." "Force them." Arvis nodded. It was an unsurprised nod. She clearly had expected such an answer. "The council denied the request again?" she asked, though the question was mostly a formality. 4 minutes, Yara said. "The whole petition. 12 minutes of presentation. 4 minutes of denial." Arvis was silent for a moment, watching the engineers on the hull far above them. Then she said, "They laughed, didn't they?" It wasn't a question. She knew. "Some of them?" Yara asked. Arvis nodded slowly. There was no anger on her face. The anger had burned out long ago, replaced by something harder and more useful. "Then let them laugh," she said. "They said we could not build it. They wrote it into the agreement. They wrote it into the law. They said it was impossible for a level 5 species to create a warship of any significant power." She paused. "They never said we couldn't design it." She handed Yara a data tablet. On it were the complete specifications of the Prometheus, pages and pages of numbers and diagrams representing 40 years of secret work by thousands of people who would never be publicly acknowledged for it. Engineers who told their families they worked in a mine, scientists who filed false research reports, pilots who trained in simulators buried so deep beneath the Earth that the surface world might as well have been another planet. Yara slowly scrolled through the specifications. "She isn't the biggest," she said. "No," Arvis agreed. "Not the fastest." "No." "Then what is she?" Arvis smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but it carried 40 years of patience and confidence. "She is the most stubborn thing we have ever built," she said. "Her power system has 9 redundant paths. You can destroy 3 entire sections, and she will keep fighting. Her weapon mounts can be reconfigured in the middle of battle by the onboard system. She carries a co-pilot, we call it Vigil, that doesn't just run calculations. It studies the enemy. It watches how they fight and finds the breaches. In every battle it participates in, it becomes smarter." She paused. "The elder races build their warships to win battles. We built ours to survive everything, and then win anyway," she said, and Yara looked at the ship again. She stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Then she took out her official communicator, registered and connected to the Solar Assembly Command Network, and sent a very short message to the Assembly's Chief Secretary. "I am submitting my resignation, effective immediately. Please note that I am taking a long leave. I will be unavailable for the foreseeable future." She turned off the official communicator and put it in her pocket. Then she took out another communicator, smaller, matte black, without official markings, and sent another message. "I am here. I am ready. Instruct me on crew selection." She put that communicator in her other pocket. "I need a table," she said to Arvis. "Already prepared," Arvis said. "Let's go." They went deeper into Iroh and Vil. While above them, the engineers continued to work on the hull of the Prometheus, and the welding torches continued to throw sparks, and the ship slowly, quietly became something real. That same night, on the other side of the galaxy, the 3rd Defensive Fleet of the Union arrived at the signal source on the far frontier. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Predvor of the Brett Dominion, a decorated veteran with 30 years of experience. His fleet consisted of 14 warships, including 2 heavy dreadnoughts. He had been told this was a precautionary patrol. He expected to find phantom signals, perhaps a cluster of wandering comets, perhaps nothing. What he found was darkness. It was an unusual darkness, for the space, at least, had been filled with distant stars and the faint light of remote systems. This was different. The stars in this region were in place, but something was in front of them, something huge, dark, and completely silent, drifting in a pattern too regular to be natural. His communications officer reported that standard calling frequencies were not responding. His science officer reported that the object or objects did not match any known profile in the Union database. Admiral Predvor ordered the fleet to hold position and prepare long-range scanning. The scanning was never completed. The darkness moved. The report reached the Union Council 18 hours later. 3 defensive fleets had been sent to the far frontiers in the last month. Each had been sent when the previous one stopped reporting. All three. The last information transmitted from one of them was a single automatic distress signal from a Union science vessel attached to the Third Fleet. The signal contained no message, only location and a timestamp showing it had been sent 30 seconds after the fleet's arrival. The Council called an emergency session. Delegates from 47 species crowded into the Crystal Hall on Verret Prime. The atmosphere was completely different from the one during the hearing for Yara's petition. There was no more boredom. There was no more quiet laughter from the gallery. There was only the silence that fills a room when 47 species are simultaneously thinking the exact same difficult thought. High Arbiter Sue stood at his high place and addressed the chamber. He said the situation was serious but manageable. He said the United Fleets of the Union were the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. He said there would be a coordinated response, and that response would be decisive. He said all member species must remain calm and trust the Union to handle this threat. He said nothing about humanity. In a briefing room, far from the Crystal Hall, 3 junior Union intelligence analysts were reviewing data from the lost fleets. One of them, a young Pelhari named Seiza, discovered something in the last transmission from the Third Fleet's flagship. It was less than half a second of video, distorted and fragmented. She cleaned it as much as she could and zoomed in. What she saw in those half seconds of video was a wall, not a metal wall, not a planet's surface, a wall made of moving parts, each one separate from the others, but all moving in the same direction. There were thousands of them, maybe more. They moved with a single purpose, in perfect coordination without a visible signal being transmitted between them. Seiza tagged the video and sent it up the chain with a priority mark. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at the still image she had made from the video. And for a while, she did nothing. She just looked at it. The galaxy, she thought, will soon be in need of something it has never needed before. On Titan, 3 kilometers under the methane sea, the welding torches were still burning. Lead Engineer D. Yunquan stood on the bridge, hovering over the main energy core of the Prometheus, checking his schedule for the 100th time. 3 months until completion if they pushed the teams hard, maybe a little less. He had worked on the ship for 19 years. He had arrived at Iro and Ville at the age of 26 as the youngest member of the original design team, full of ideas that senior engineers thought were too complex and too ambitious. He stayed because the senior engineers eventually admitted he was right. He had never been to a real party. He had missed weddings, funerals, and birthdays. His daughter, now 17 and living with her mother in Seoul, had grown up thinking her father worked at a mine somewhere in the outer system. She thought he was boring. She thought he was absent. She thought he cared more about rocks and numbers than about her. She wasn't entirely wrong, and that was what he carried with him every day. But now he looked at the Prometheus, at what 19 years and thousands of people had built in the darkness, and he felt something that was more than regret. He felt certainty. He would fly her. She would fight. And when she did, every human who had given a part of their life to build her would matter, even if no one ever knew their names. He returned to work. The ship was almost ready. The first thing every new recruit was told when they arrived at Iro and Ville was simple. Forget everything you think you know about how warships should work. The second thing they were told, now let us show you how ours actually does. Lieutenant Petra Shimmick had arrived at Iro and Ville 6 years ago, fresh from the Navigation Academy of the Earth Defense Corps, where she had graduated with honors. She was 28 years old. She was tall, with short dark hair and that focused, calm face that people sometimes mistook for coldness. She wasn't cold. She was just always thinking of 3 things at once. When she first entered the main hangar and saw the Prometheus, she stopped and stared at the ship for a very long time without saying a word. The engineer walking beside her thought she was impressed by the size. She wasn't impressed by the size. She was running calculations. She was computing what movement the ship was capable of based on the visible shape of the hull and the distance between the engine ports. She was mentally mapping the approach and departure angles the design allowed. She was thinking about how the layout of the weapon mounts would affect the ship's center of gravity during a sharp turn. In short, she was already learning to pilot a ship she hadn't even touched. By the end of the tour, she had filled 14 pages of her personal notebook. She was exactly the person Iro needed. Yara Asai had been selecting the crew of the Prometheus with extreme care for 3 months. She reviewed records, analyzed simulations, and personally spoke with every candidate. She wasn't looking for the best shots or the fastest reflexes. The Union species had plenty of those. She was looking for something harder to measure and harder to find. She was looking for people who could think outside the box, people who, when the situation stopped making sense, didn't freeze. They showed creativity. The crew consisted of 87 people. That was small for a ship the size of the Prometheus, but Quan had designed her intentionally that way. Fewer people, more automation, faster decision-making. Each crew member covered several roles. Everyone could do another's job in an emergency, at least well enough for the ship to stay alive. Lieutenant Tomas Adami was a weapons specialist. He was 31 years old. He was broad and sturdily built, with a quiet demeanor that didn't match the job of blowing everything to pieces. He had grown up reading about old naval warfare on Earth, ancient ships on the oceans, before space, before other species, when humans fought each other with cannons and gunpowder. He found in those old books ideas that no one in the modern Union used anymore. Not because those ideas were bad, but because everyone had decided they were too simple, too old, too small. Tomas didn't think things were too old or too small if they worked. He had spent years adapting old Earth naval artillery concepts to space combat, making them work with modern weapons technology. His torpedo distribution patterns were unlike anything in Union combat doctrine. They were unpredictable in ways most weapons systems weren't designed to be unpredictable in. That was his entire theory. The enemy could adapt to anything regular, but had to actually think about something irregular. And thinking takes time. In battle, time is everything. Then there was Vigil. The Vigil system, the name stood for Variable Intelligence for Guided Independent Learning, had been in development almost as long as the ship itself. It wasn't a simple targeter. It wasn't a navigation assistant. Union warships used computer systems of varying levels of complexity, most of which were very good at their purpose, but they were designed for specific tasks and performed those tasks the same way every time. Vigil didn't work like that. Vigil watched. That was its primary function, observation. It watched the enemy, cataloged every action, identified patterns, and built a constantly evolving model of how the enemy operated. As the battle progressed, Vigil's model became more and more accurate, and its recommendations became more and more specific. It learned from every engagement in real time. The team that built Vigil had argued for years about how much personality to give it. Some wanted a purely analytical system without a voice, without preferences, just data. Others argued that a system working alongside a human crew should communicate on human terms, not just in numbers. In the end, the second group won, and Vigil was given a voice calm, clear, without obvious emotion, but also without the mechanical flatness that makes it hard to trust a system. When Yara first met Vigil, she asked it a simple question. She said, "What are our chances in a real battle?" Vigil was silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then it said, "That depends on the enemy. Against any opponent I have had time to study, our chances improve significantly with each minute of engagement. Against an unknown opponent, our chances are initially uncertain, but the tendency is toward improvement as soon as I gather data. The more I see, the more useful I become." Yara nodded slowly. "And if there is no time to gather data, then we rely on what the crew knows," Vigil asked. "Which means the quality of the crew is just as important as my own ability. We are designed to work together." Yara decided at that moment that she liked Vigil. Not the way people like pets or friends, but the way soldiers like weapons they trust, respect, born from understanding what it is capable of and faith that it will not fail. When it mattered, the 3 months of preparation that followed Yara's arrival and the finalization of the crew were the most difficult and the most important months that Iroh and Vil had ever seen. The engineers pushed the completion schedule as hard as they could. Quan didn't sleep. He moved through the station from one work group to another, checking welds, power connections, and calibrations, catching problems before they became battles. He was everywhere at once. And the teams worked better when he watched, not because he intimidated them, but because his confidence was contagious. At the same time, the crew trained. First, they trained in simulators fully detailed models of the Prometheus systems, accurate to the millisecond of delay between command and ship response. Petra conducted such intense navigation training that she sometimes finished a session shaking from the concentration required. Tomas conducted weapons training that included scenarios no standard combat manual would include: shooting through debris fields, using the ship's exhaust trail as cover, coordinating weapon strikes to create specific patterns in target defenses rather than just maximum damage. The rest of the crew trained their own roles with the same seriousness: the medical team, engineering, emergency communications, secondary systems. Everyone trained, everyone failed, and everyone tried again. And they failed in different ways and tried again after that. Yara watched it all. She walked through training zones, corridors, and engineering compartments at all hours of the day and said very little. But she always watched. She had learned over years of military service that the most important thing a commander could do during preparation was not to give orders. It was to deeply understand what each person in the team was capable of under pressure, so that when the pressure came, she knew exactly who to rely on and for what. She also read. She read everything she could find about the Nullorn. Scattered sensor readings, analyst reports, fragmented video from the far frontiers. She read about the Union's response, which was moving slowly, and with a lot of argument between the elder races about who should command the united counterforces. She read about the 3 lost defensive fleets and the silence where 14 ships had once been. The Nullorn, from everything she could gather, did not fight like other species. They had no front lines. They had no flagships. They had no visible command structures that could be attacked to disrupt their coordination. They moved as a mass. Every unit was a part of a larger whole, and the larger whole controlled every unit with perfect coordination and without visible delay. It was as if fighting one of them meant fighting them all simultaneously. The Union's doctrine against such an enemy was essentially simple: mass your own firepower and suppress the mass with greater mass. It was a doctrine. Their ships were powerful and numerous. Theoretically, it should work. Theoretically. Yara had a feeling, the same feeling that lives below words, in the part of the brain that keeps score without being asked, that theory and reality would be very different in this case. 8 weeks into the training program, something happened that turned the feeling of urgency at Iro and Vil into something more acute. Public Union news channels, which Iro and Vil constantly monitored behind layers of signal encryption, reported that the Union's United Fleet had engaged the Nullorn at the edge of the Reach sector, deep within what had previously been considered safe Union space. The fleet consisted of ships from 4 species, including 6 heavy Brett warships. The cumulative firepower of the fleet was significant. The clash lasted 9 hours. The fleet was destroyed. Not damaged, not scattered, destroyed. Every ship. The last transmission from the flagship of the fleet, a Brett dreadnought called Victory's Confidence, consisted of 2 words. The communications officer on duty simply said, in a voice that held no emotion, only pure, level fact: they are everywhere. Then silence. The news reached the Union Council as a significant tactical failure. The language was cautious. The language was managed. But between the lines of the cautious, managed language was something much more honest, and every person at Iro and Vil could read it. The Union was afraid. Yara held an all-hands meeting in the main training hall. 87 people sat or stood in rows and looked at her. Some of them were young, very young, in the way military personnel often seem young before they have seen something real. Some of them had been at Iro and Vil for years and had already learned to carry the burden of secrecy and sacrifice. Everyone waited. She didn't give them a speech about duty or glory. She never liked those speeches, even when she was young enough to be moved by them. Instead, she told them the truth. She said, "The Union has lost another fleet, but the Nullorn are no longer at the edge of known space. They are moving inward. At their current rate of advance, they will reach the core worlds of the Union in less than 2 years, perhaps less." She paused and looked at the faces before her. "The elder races are still arguing about the command structure," she said. "They are still filing reports, holding meetings, and debating doctrine. They will eventually assemble a response force. Perhaps it will be a very good force. Perhaps it will be enough." She paused again. "But perhaps not. And if it is not enough, the remaining worlds of the Union will have nothing standing between them and the thing that has already destroyed everything sent against it." She slowly scanned the room. "Except us." No one spoke. "The Prometheus is not ready to fight the Nullorn alone," she said. "I am not going to deny that, but she will be ready in 4 weeks. And when she is ready, she will be something no one in this galaxy has ever seen before, because she will be something no one in this galaxy believed we could build." She stopped, letting the silence hang for a moment. "They told us we couldn't. We did it anyway. Now we have to show them why." Still, no one spoke, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of people waiting to hear something. It was the silence of people who had heard what they needed to hear and were now shifting their minds to the next step. Petra, in the 3rd row, was already counting. 3 weeks and 5 days after the meeting, Quan walked through every section of the Prometheus one last time. He started at the bow and worked to the stern, personally checking every system not because he doubted his teams, but because he needed to know with his own hands and his own eyes that everything was all right. He was in the engine room, the real, physical engine room, not its diagram when his communicator rang. It was his daughter in Seoul. She had sent him a short message, the kind teenagers send when they aren't quite ready to make a real call but want to say something. It read, "Dad, are you okay? You've been silent." He looked at the message for a long time in the warm hum of the engine room, where the main power core cycled around him like a slow mechanical heartbeat. He typed back, "I am fine, working. We'll explain everything soon, I promise." He sent it, put the communicator away, and finished the inspection. Every system checked, every connection confirmed, every redundant path active and responsive, weapons loaded and ready. Vigil was active and had already started its passive observation modes, building its models of the world outside. Quan stood in the center of the ship's main corridor, alone in the silence. He had given 19 years to this. He had missed his daughter growing up. He had missed things that could not be replaced. He had told himself for 19 years that it was worth it, that the day would come when he would know for sure it was worth it. He still didn't know for sure. But standing in the corridor of a ship his team had built secretly in the darkness, in defiance of all the laws that said they weren't allowed to, he felt that was close enough to certainty for now. He went to the bridge. Yara was already there, standing at the main viewport, looking at the rock walls of the massive Iro and Vil hangar surrounding them. "Engineering has given final clearance," he said. She turned to look at him. "She is ready. She is ready." Yara nodded. She looked back at the viewport. Then she said something that Quan would remember for the rest of his life. "Then let's go see what they do when we show up." Somewhere in the galaxy, the Nullorn were moving inward. Somewhere in the crystal chambers of the Union, the elder races were still arguing. Somewhere above them, in the cold methane sea, the surface of Titan was dark, motionless, and silent, as if the moon itself were holding its breath. The Prometheus turned on. Its lights flickered to life. Its engines hummed. Its systems ran a final check and returned green lights on every panel. "Vigil," Yara said. "One word on the bridge. Ready." And for the first time in 40 years of secret work and hidden sacrifice, the ship that humanity was not supposed to build began to move. The message from High Arbiter Sue arrived on a Tuesday morning, which meant nothing to anyone outside Earth. But to Yara Asai, it seemed significant, in a way she could not explain. Tuesdays always seemed to her like days when things happen, whether you want them to or not. The Prometheus was in transit, moving quietly and deep along the outer cargo lanes on a route that avoided all Union traffic monitoring stations. She was fully charged, but not transmitting. To any passive scanner, she looked like a large, automated cargo vessel, one of thousands that moved through this part of space daily. It was a disguise that Quan's electronics team had taken 3 months to perfect, and it worked well enough for a start. Yara was in her office, a small room next to the main corridor with a narrow table, 1 chair, and a wall of screens showing the ship's status. She was reading a report on the Nullorn's movement patterns when Vigil interrupted her with a quiet, clear alert. "Admiral, you have a message on a private diplomatic channel. Identification: High Arbiter Sue of the Brett Dominion." Yara stopped reading. She looked at the screen. "How did he get this channel?" she asked. "Unknown," Vigil said. "The routing is complex. It passed through at least 8 relay points. I cannot determine the origin with certainty, but the encryption signature matches official Brett Council communications." Yara froze for a moment, then said, "Play it." Sue's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in a room that seemed to be somewhere on board a ship, not in the council hall. The familiar cold authority was still on his face, but beneath it was something else. Yara had spent enough time in the council hall watching Sue to know his face well. What was underneath it was not exactly fear. It was what came before fear in people who are not used to being afraid. The message was not long. Sue said the Union Council had convened an emergency committee on resource allocation. He said the committee had determined that all Union member worlds were expected to contribute to the defense, according to Emergency Provision 7 of the Union Charter. He said that according to this provision, humanity's colonial worlds in the Cygnus Corridor would be repurposed as supply bases for the Union's new defensive line. Human administrative personnel on those worlds would be relocated. Human cargo fleets in the affected sectors would be requisitioned and transferred to the Union's Logistics Command. He also said that the Earth Defense Corps would contribute its patrol vessels to the new United Fleet gathering at the Ura Assembly Point. Human ships would serve under Union command and be integrated into standard fleet formation. He said all this was in accordance with the Treaty of Vassalage, and the Union expected full cooperation. He did not say please. He also said nothing about the petition. He said nothing about reclassification. He said nothing about warships. What he did say was, "You will give us your worlds for use, your ships for command, and your people to be pushed aside. And you will do it because you agreed to do it when you signed the treaty. And you have no choice, because you have no power, because you were never allowed to build that which creates power." That was his unspoken meaning. Yara heard every word. She immediately called Delegate Junie Cha. Cha was Earth's official representative at the Union Station on Verret Prime. She was 47 years old. She had a level, careful manner of speaking that she had developed over 20 years of diplomacy. She had been Earth's representative for 6 years, and in those 6 years, she had gained a reputation in the Union Council as someone who was very polite, very patient, and very, very hard to move once she made up her mind. Cha listened to the summary of the message in silence. Then she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "They are asking." "No," Yara said. "It is the treaty used as a weapon." Cha said, "They are taking our colonial worlds, our logistics capacity, and our patrol ships. They are putting us entirely under their command structure. If the Nullorn break through, we will have no independent defense at all." "I know." Another silence. "What do you need from me?" Cha asked. "I need you to relay a message to the Solar Assembly," Yara said. "I need them to vote for compliance, and I need them to understand what they are voting for." "They will likely vote for compliance," Cha said cautiously. "You know this." "I know," Yara said again. "I just need them to do it officially on the record, because what happens after will not be official." There was a pause on the channel. Then Cha said in a slightly different tone, "The Prometheus is getting its first real mission." "Yes," Yara said. Cha was silent for a moment. "Then be careful, Yara. I am always careful." "No," Cha said, and in her voice was something like amusement. "You are always effective." That is not the same thing. The Solar Assembly gathered 2 days later. It was a closed session, accessible only to primary representatives, with no external observers and a complete ban on communications for the duration. The message from Sue was read aloud. There were questions. There was argument. There was that special kind of controlled anger that political bodies display when they are deeply enraged but also deeply aware that anger is not a useful tool. In the moment, the vote for compliance with Emergency Provision 7 was 41 against 7. It passed. Yara received the notification on the bridge of the Prometheus. She read it. She put the notification aside. Then she officially submitted her resignation from the official military register of the Solar Assembly, a resignation she had submitted once before on paper, but now it had to be made permanent and undeniable. From this moment, she had no official rank, no official commission, and no official connection to any government body. On paper, she was a nobody. The Prometheus, on paper, did not exist. She switched on the ship's communication channel and addressed the crew. "You have all seen the news from the Assembly. The government of Earth's official position is compliance. Our colonial worlds will be used as supply bases. Our patrol ships will join the Union fleet. This is the official position." She paused. "We are not the official position." She felt a shift on the bridge around her even before anyone spoke. Petra, at the navigation console, straightened slightly. Tomas, at weapons, turned his chair toward her just a bit. Vigil's status indicator on the main screen switched from passive to active mode without a command. "The Nullorn are moving faster than the Union's models predicted," Yara said. "Their next projected contact point is the Katara system. Katara. It is a core Union world. 2 billion people. Mixed population, including over 200 humans. The available Union defensive forces are gathering at Ura, which is 3 full days away from Katara. They won't make it there in time." She let the number 2 billion people hang in the air for a moment. "We can make it," she said. "Vigil, plot a course for Katara." "Course plotted," Vigil said immediately. "Travel time at maximum speed, 19 hours and 14 minutes. Set course. Maximum speed." "Admiral," Vigil said, in the calm, careful tone it used when it was about to say something that needed to be said clearly. I must note that our arrival at Katara without permission is a direct violation of the Treaty of Vassalage and will be visible to all Union tracking systems the moment we engage the jump drive at departure. I know, Admiral. Set course. Course set, Admiral. Good, Yara said. Let's go. On Verret Prime, Delegate Junie Cha sat through 16 hours of an emergency council summit that she never expected to find useful, but it surprised her a little, at least in one aspect. The hall was full. Every seat was occupied. The tension in the Crystal Hall was different than during the emergency summit 2 weeks ago. That time, there had been fear and arguments. Now there was something harder to name, a kind of tense, expectant uncertainty, as if the hall knew that today something would be decided that could not be undone later. The Bretts wanted overall command, as was traditional, and the Aloons objected, pointing out that the Brett fleet doctrine had failed catastrophically 3 times against the Nullorn. The Pelhari suggested a committee structure, which the Aloons called unworkable. The Bretts called it insulting. 3 smaller species tried to offer compromise proposals and were, in essence, ignored. Part of the business took place at the Earth delegation, a small corner near the back of the hall where Level 5 species sat, and listened to it all without saying a word. In front of her sat a glass of water, which she refilled twice. She had a notebook she was constantly filling, not with arguments, but with observations. She watched the elder races argue, thought about everything she had learned in 20 years of diplomacy, and waited. At 14:00, Sue announced a break. During the break, Cha walked through the corridors of the council building. She passed delegates from a dozen different species who nodded at her without much recognition. She was the delegate from Earth. She was level 5. To most people in this building, she was background noise. She thought about this. She thought about how background noise works. It is always there. Nobody notices it until it stops. She returned to the hall for the final 2 hours of the session with a very clear understanding of what she was going to do. When the session opened for closing statements, she raised her hand. Sue looked at her with that special expression of surprise that strong people show when something they have forgotten suddenly demands their attention. "The delegate from Earth," he said with barely concealed reluctance. Cha stood up. She took her notebook. She slowly surveyed the hall, establishing deliberate eye contact with as many delegates as possible. Then she began. "I have sat in this hall for 6 years," she said. "I have listened. I have taken notes. I have voted when I was allowed, and abstained when required. I have followed all procedural rules and all provisions of the treaty in complete good faith." A small number of delegates had already stopped paying attention. She continued, "Over these 6 years, I have heard a great deal about what humanity is, what we are capable of and what we are not, what we are permitted and what is forbidden. I have heard this from species that have been engaging in interstellar travel for 500 years, or 1,000, or 5,000. I nodded, listened, and submitted my reports. Now more people were paying attention. The hall became a little quieter. Sue's expression changed from tolerant to wary. "Today I will say something different," Cha said. She looked at her notebook. "I have a list here. It is a list of every Union member species that has, at some point in its history, violated the Treaty of Vassalage or its preceding treaties or the restrictions imposed upon it by the elder races of its era to ensure its own survival." She began to read the list. She read 41 names. The first name she read belonged to a secondary aquatic species called the Velhu, who had secretly developed energy weapons 4 centuries ago in violation of treaty restrictions in response to a regional threat that their senior partners in the Union considered insignificant. The Velhu, who used those weapons, survived, and were quietly forgiven for the violation when the threat was confirmed as real. The second name was a mid-level species called the Bora, who built defensive platforms in violation of treaty terms after their home world was threatened and successfully argued before the Council that survival justifies necessity. The list continued. Some names were well known in Union history. Some were obscure. Some had led to reprimands that were later quietly rescinded. All 41 had done what they needed to do to continue existing against the objections of those who held power at the time. By the 32nd name, it was very quiet in the hall. By the 41st, several delegates were staring at the table before them, not at Cha. She put down the notebook. "We built a warship not because we wanted war," she said. "We built it because we wanted to survive." Each species on that list had done the same thing. You helped some of them. You forgave everyone, because in the end, you realized that survival is not defiance, it is necessity. She looked directly at Sue. "The Prometheus is heading to Katara," she said. "Whatever you decide about this, whether it is issuing a reprimand, imposing sanctions, declaring it a violation, or simply watching what will happen, understand that we did not do this to challenge you. We did this because 2 billion people live in the Katara system, including 200 of ours, and no one else would have gotten there in time." She sat down. The hall was silent for a long time. Then Sue said quietly, "The session is adjourned for deliberation." It was not approval, it was not forgiveness, but it was also not an immediate sanctioning. And in the language of union politics, adjourned for deliberation was the closest thing to a pause anyone had ever heard from him. In the third row of the middle balcony, 2 delegates from a small species called the Garrote leaned toward each other and whispered. One of them watched the door through which Cha had already begun to exit. The delegate's eyes were wide open. "Did you know they built it?" the first Garrote asked. "No," the second replied. "Did anyone know?" The second delegate watched the door for another moment. "Obviously they knew," he said quietly. "They just didn't tell us." On the Prometheus, 19 hours into the journey, Vigil spoke. "Admiral, I am scanning the Katara system with long-range sensors. Union defense ships have already engaged. I count 31 Union warships. The Nullorn mass is significantly larger." Yara was on the bridge. She hadn't left the bridge since the departure from Titan. She stood at the main viewport, looking at the stars ahead. "How significantly larger?" she asked. "The Nullorn formation is approximately 4 times the cumulative mass of the Union fleet," Vigil said. "Union ships are sustaining damage. 3 vessels are already showing critical system failures." On the bridge it was quiet. Everyone was at their station. Tomas placed his hands on the weapons panel while pressing nothing yet, simply ready. Petra locked navigation to the approach vector and adjusted the angle with small increments, already calculating. "Vigil, what do we know specifically about this Nullorn formation?" Yara asked. "I have been observing their combat patterns since we entered sensor range. I have updated my behavioral model," Vigil said. "Nullorn coordination appears to function without a central command node. Each unit reacts to local conditions but shares information with the entire mass in real time. The destruction of one section does not slow the others. However, I have identified a pattern in how they prioritize targets. They focus primarily on the heaviest weapon platforms, the ships that cause them the most damage. Less threatening targets they initially ignore. Yara processed this, so if something appears that does not threaten them immediately, they will not prioritize it? Correct, for a limited time, until they determine what it is and what it is capable of." She looked at Petra. "Bring us in quietly, with a low signature level. Give them nothing to read until I say so." Petra nodded and made adjustments. The Prometheus's output power dropped to a fraction of its total. The ship moved slowly, looking small and ordinary, creeping between the wreckage of destroyed ships that were already beginning to spread through the combat zone. The wreckage, Yara noticed, was significant. A heavy Brett warship called Iron Will had been struck hard on the port side and was drifting. It was still mostly intact, but its main engines were clearly non-functional. A smaller Alun cruiser had lost its entire forward section, and its crew sections were broadcasting automatic evacuation signals. Several other ships had signs of contact with the Nullorn long, scorched streaks on the hull where Nullorn units had struck with something that appeared to be a directed energy type that Union analysts hadn't yet fully characterized. On the far edge of the combat zone, the largest Brett warship, the flagship Eternal Dominion, was still fighting. It was the most powerful ship in the Union fleet, nearly 400 meters long, with more weapon batteries than most stations. It was firing everything it had, but the Nullorn flowed around it like water around a stone. They were not attacking it directly. They were pressing on it from several angles, forcing it to constantly rotate to bring weapons to bear, slowly wearing it down. Yara watched the Eternal Dominion for a moment. "Vigil," she said, "Nullorn mass. How many individual units do you count?" "Approximately 3,000 visible units within sensor range," Vigil said. "I cannot account for what may be in the outer field, and their blind spots. What did you find in 23 minutes? 3 points worth noting," Vigil said. "First, they react slowly to changes that do not represent an immediate threat. A ship moving sideways through their field will be retargeted in approximately 90 seconds. Second, the coordination pattern requires each unit to be within approximately 800 meters of 2 other units to maintain full integration with the whole. Units isolated from this network range show reduced coordination. Third, their forward pressure increases when the enemy retreats. When Union ships retreat, the Nullorn accelerate. Yara absorbed this. She turned to Tomas. Your torpedo spread configurations. The ones from the old naval doctrine. Yes, Admiral. Tell me about the triangular spread, the old indirect approach. Tomas pulled up the configuration on his screen without hesitation. The old naval doctrine he had adapted was from Earth's pre-space history, the era of ocean warships, when one fleet couldn't simply collide with another head-on because the angles were wrong and one had to approach from unexpected directions. The principle was simple. Instead of shooting directly at the target, you shot where the target would be when it moved, to avoid where it thought you were shooting. In modern space combat, this was considered too complex to be practical. If their units have to stay within 800 meters of each other to remain coordinated, Tomas said, his voice becoming faster and quieter the way it did when he was solving a problem, and they react to retreat with acceleration, we can bait part of the mass to detach. Conduct a fast pass along their leading edge. They will retarget to us. We retreat. They will accelerate. They will stretch their formation. When they stretch beyond the 800-meter threshold, the isolated units will lose coordination. Then we strike at the breach. Time window. When will the breach open? Yara asked. Unknown, Vigil said. But I estimate 30 to 60 seconds before they can close it and restore network integration. 30 seconds, Petra said from navigation. I can handle 30 seconds. Good, Yara said. Because that is exactly what we will give you. She straightened and scanned the bridge. Here is what we are going to do. First pass. We go fast along the leading edge of the Nullorn. Not firing, just moving. We want them to notice us. We want them to retarget. Petra, this first pass must look as if we are afraid. Make it look like the beginning of a retreat. Petra nodded. I can play fear. Second, when they accelerate after us, Tomas will perform the triangular spread into the forming breach. Maximum damage. We want to disrupt their network contact in a section, not destroy them completely. If Vigil is right about the loss of coordination upon isolation, a confused section will be more useful to us than a destroyed section. Entanglement in one section will spread disorganization to neighboring sections as they try to reconcile contradictory data, Vigil confirmed. They constantly exchange information. Entanglement in one section will cause disorganization in neighboring sections as they try to... Their problem now is that they are scattered and firing at an enemy that flows around them. If we can compress the Nullorn mass from one side, we will give the Union fleet a concentrated target. She looked at Tomas. Choose a weapon configuration that creates the widest zone of effective pressure. Tomas was already typing. Configuration 7, he said. Point pressure. Wide spread. Not ideal for direct destruction, but excellent for creating movement, like a wall of fire. Perfect, Yara said. Vigil, initiate the hail sequence for the Eternal Dominion. Open a channel. Channel open, Vigil said. Brett flagship, Yara said to the open channel. This is HSV Prometheus, Solar Assembly. We are entering the combat zone on a northern approach vector. In approximately 4 minutes, we will create a breach in the forward Nullorn mass. When the breach opens, move your fleet forward and concentrate fire into the center of the breach. Do not wait. The channel was silent for a moment. Then a voice sounded deep, abrupt, in the carefully controlled tone of a Brett officer handling something unexpected, unidentified vessel. Identify yourself and provide authorization codes. I just identified myself, Yara said calmly. I have no authorization codes. I am a ship that shouldn't exist. You can ask me questions after the battle. Right now, when you see the breach, move forward and shoot into it. That is all. She looked at Petra. Go. The first pass was fast, clean, and intentionally looked like panic. Petra led the Prometheus tightly along the northern edge of the Nullorn mass, moving at full power in a wide, slightly erratic arc that looked, if seen on a tactical screen, like a ship that had entered too fast and was now trying to correct itself. It was entirely intentional. Every wobble was calculated. She flew the ship the way an actor plays fear, using technical skill to create exactly the emotion she wanted the enemy to feel. The reaction was exactly as Vigil had predicted. Part of the mass, approximately 400 units, began to shift, retargeting to the new and seemingly vulnerable target. They were accelerating. They moved away from the main mass toward the Prometheus's position. They're biting, Petra said. Her voice was level and focused. Let them get closer, Yara said. Not too close. The Nullorn units closed the distance. The Prometheus still looked like it was running away. Petra adjusted speed to stay just ahead of the pursuing mass. On the tactical screen, the breach in the main Nullorn body was becoming visible. A dark space in the bright mass where 400 units had been the breach was forming. Vigil? The density of units in the breach zone is falling below the optimal network cohesion threshold. Now Tomas, Yara said. Tomas, fire. The triangular spread left the forward tubes of the Prometheus in a wide fan, not a focused line. The torpedoes did not go straight into the Nullorn mass. They went at angles into the space where the pursuing section was still connected to the main body. When they exploded in the gaps and on the edges, not in the center of anything. The explosion pattern was designed to create confusion, not direct destruction, and it worked. The pursuing section lost connectivity. The units didn't stop moving, but they stopped moving together. They started scattering in different directions. Each followed its local program without the network intelligence for their coordination. They went wide. They drifted off course. Some returned. Some went further. The breach in the main Nullorn mass opened completely. Union fleet, Yara said on the open channel, broadcasting on all frequencies. Now, center of the breach, 40 degrees north. Fire now. For a moment, nothing happened, and Yara felt a cold and irrational fear that they would not react in time, that the 30 seconds would pass. Then, the Eternal Dominion moved. It was remarkable, in its way, a 400-meter Brett warship, damaged and strained, shifted forward with all its remaining engines and brought its main weapon systems to bear on the breach the Prometheus had created, and the rest of the Union ships, seeing the flagship move, moved with it. The disciplined instinct of a military fleet following the leader worked in their favor here, even if it had worked against them before. The concentrated fire that struck the breach in the Nullorn mass was immense. 6 heavy ships were firing everything they had into one point. The Nullorn units in that breach, already fragmented from the violation of their network, had no prepared, coordinated reaction. The damage was catastrophic. Hundreds of units were destroyed or disabled in less than 30 seconds. The main Nullorn mass froze for the first time in the entire battle. Vigil's voice sounded clear. Forward Nullorn advance halted. I am recording a recalculation pattern in their movement. They are revising their tactical model. Configuration 7. Yara said to Tomas. Wide pressure spread, pushing them back. Tomas didn't need to be told twice. He had been waiting for this. The wide arc of the weapon spread left the forward tubes, not aimed at individual targets but filling the space in front of the Nullorn mass like a moving wall of fire. The Nullorn units on the leading edge, meeting fire from a direction they did not expect, began to retreat. The Union fleet, having been granted a moment's respite for the first time in 6 hours, continued to advance into the breach. Now they found their rhythm, not the rhythm of a rigid formation that the Nullorn had learned to flow around, but something more reactive, following the shape of the battle rather than trying to impose a shape on it. Petra worked constantly, threading through the wreckage and along the edge of the combat zone, never staying in one place long enough to become a target, always positioning for the next moment. The ship moved the way Quan had designed her to move, smoothly, responsively, capable of changing direction without the long, preliminary corrections required by heavier vessels. Vigil transmitted information to her in real time, marking threats and opportunities on her navigation display. The battle was far from won. The Nullorn were still there, still huge, still capable, but the momentum had shifted. The Eternal Dominion hailed them again. The voice this time was different. It was still Brett, still controlled, still cautious, but something in its quality had changed. The special kind of disdain that Brett officers usually wore like armor was not entirely present. Something in it had cracked. Unidentified vessel, the voice said. Your weapon configuration differs from any recognized system in the Union database. Your tactical approach is also unrecognized. Confirm identification. HSV Prometheus, Yara said. For the second time, Admiral Yara Asai, Earth Defense Corps, Solar Assembly. She paused for one deliberate beat. A human ship. The channel was silent for a moment. On the tactical screens around her, the battle continued. The Union fleet was pressing its advantage. The Nullorn mass was retreating and regrouping in the outer zone. Then the voice sounded again. Admiral Asai, confirm your vessel was built by humans. Every bolt, Yara said. Another pause. "Your maneuver with the breach," the voice said. This was not in any Union combat doctrine. "No," Yara agreed. "It was not. Where did it come from?" Yara looked at the bridge for a moment. Tomas was watching his screens. Petra was flying the ship. Vigil's status indicator was stable and green. 87 people were doing their work with the quiet focus of people who had spent years preparing for exactly this. "Old books," she said. The channel went silent again. "Now the Nullorn are reconfiguring. Their mass is shifting toward the eastern approach." "I see it," Yara said. "Reroute your fleet to the eastern anchor point. We will take the center." She looked at Petra. "Eastern intercept, fast approach, same bait pattern." "Same bait pattern," Petra confirmed. And the Prometheus was already moving. The battle lasted another 4 hours after the arrival of the Prometheus. Another 4 hours of heavy, brutal, close-quarters combat that left everyone on the ship exhausted. And most of the Union fleet ships needed significant repairs. 3 more Union ships were destroyed during those 4 hours. The Prometheus took 2 direct hits. The first, from a section of Nullorn units that had adapted to the bait pattern and stopped pursuing, which required Tomas to develop a new approach on the spot, which he did in 6 minutes. The second hit was a glancing blow that damaged the port engine array and made Petra's handling significantly more difficult, which she managed without complaint and with only slightly more swearing than was usually permitted on a military bridge. Vigil continuously processed information, updating its model of Nullorn behavior, finding new patterns, marking new opportunities. By the end of the battle, its model had become detailed enough to predict the movement of individual Nullorn sections with approximately 70% accuracy for 10 seconds ahead. The Nullorn didn't break. They didn't surrender. They weren't defeated, not truly, but they halted their advance. At some point in the last hour of the battle, their mass simply stopped advancing and began holding position, and then slowly retreated. Union sensors tracked their withdrawal from the Katara system back to the outer zone. It was not a permanent withdrawal. Everyone knew the Nullorn were recalculating, re-evaluating, reforming. They would return, but they were not here, and Katara still stood, and 2 billion people were alive. In the silence afterward, Quan, sitting at his monitoring post on the lower deck of the Prometheus, with a cold cup of tea beside him, looked at the damage report of the ship on his screen. Port engine array 40%, 2 external sensor nodes damaged, 1 minor hull breach in the forward storage section, no casualties already pressurized. The rest of the ship was in good condition. Every redundant system functioned as intended. Every power redirection worked. Every contingency had been handled. He had given 19 years to this to ensure it would be so. He had missed his daughter growing up to ensure it would be so. He thought about her message, "Are you okay?" And he thought that he would have to have a very long talk with her soon about what he had been doing, why about the ship she didn't know existed. He would tell her everything she deserved to know. But first, he picked up the cold tea, drank it, and let the silence of the moment rest around him for a while. Because the Prometheus had done what she was built for, and for a start, that was enough. On the damaged bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the Brett commander who had spoken to Yara twice on the open channel and never identified himself, sat in his command chair and stared at the tactical display, where the Prometheus was visible as a small green marker on the edge of the combat zone. His first officer submitted a preliminary report. It included, at the Brett commander's special request, a detailed report on every tactic the human ship had used during the battle. The breach maneuver, the approach, the bait, the spread, the pressure, the way the ship's weapons reconfigured twice in the middle of battle. The AI system that seemed to anticipate the Nullorn's movement with increasing accuracy as the engagement progressed. He read the report carefully. He had been fighting in space for 32 years. He had commanded ships in 7 significant engagements. He had studied, as all Brett officers did, the entire history of Union fleet doctrine since its inception. He had never seen a ship fight the way the Prometheus had fought today. It wasn't that she was the most powerful vessel, she wasn't. It wasn't that she destroyed the most Nullorn units, she hadn't. What she had done was something harder to define and, perhaps, harder to teach. She read the battle. She understood what was needed not from the perspective of maximum firepower, but from the perspective of maximum effect. She had used every available tool, including tools that were not in standard doctrine, and she had used them at the right moment, in the right way, for the right reason. He began to write his incident report. At the top of the section, tactical assessment of friendly forces. He wrote a sentence that slightly surprised him when he reread it, because he hadn't planned to write it, and it emerged from his mind fully formed. The human ship acted at a level of tactical sophistication that this commander has not previously encountered in 32 years of active service. He stared at that sentence for a moment, then left it and continued writing. The video reached every corner of the Union. Within 48 hours, it had not been officially released by anyone. It had been extracted from the sensor logs of 7 different Union ships present at the Battle of Katara, compiled by an unknown party. Most believed it was a junior communications technician on a Pelhari corvette who hadn't slept all night doing it, and distributed through the Union's public information network without any definite authorization, approval, or warning. The video showed the Prometheus in battle. It showed the first pass over the Nullorn mass, the ship moving with a controlled, intentional speed that seemed reckless but clearly wasn't. It showed the breach opening, how the Union fleet reacted. The coordinated pressure spread, pushing the Nullorn back. It showed how the ship took 2 hits and kept fighting as if nothing significant had happened. It showed the moments when weapons reconfigured in the middle of battle, which Union analysts hadn't stopped talking about since the engagement ended. It showed the moment when the Eternal Dominion moved forward into the breach and how the rest of the fleet followed it. It showed what happened when a ship that shouldn't have existed appeared and changed the direction of a battle that had been going very badly. By the end of the first day, the video had been watched by about 3 billion people from 47 species. By the end of the second day, that number had doubled. The Union Council, which had been preparing an official motion to reprimand Earth for violating the treaty, found itself in the unusual position of issuing an official document condemning an action that most of the galaxy was openly celebrating. The Brett hardliners still pushed for a reprimand. 3 smaller species, the Garat, the Velhu, and a newly accepted species called the Tauren, publicly announced that they opposed the reprimand. The Alun delegation, which had long felt complex feelings about the Brett domination of the Council, was demonstratively silent on the issue, which in Union politics meant exactly what it seemed. High Arbiter Sue called an emergency session. The hall was full again. Every seat was occupied. Every delegation was present. The atmosphere in the hall was different compared to the emergency summit 2 weeks ago. That summit had been full of fear and arguments. This one was full of something harder to name, a kind of tense, expectant uncertainty, as if the hall knew that today something would be decided that could not be undone later. Sue opened the session by formally presenting the motion for a reprimand of the Solar Assembly. He spoke for 11 minutes. He was precise. He cited the Treaty of Vassalage, chapter by chapter. He described the creation and purpose of the treaty, to ensure galactic stability by preventing young, militarily immature civilizations from acquiring military power before they gained the wisdom to use it responsibly. He said that everything the Prometheus had achieved at Katara was irrelevant to the question of legality. He said that condoning treaty violations, regardless of circumstances, would forever undermine the foundations of the Union's legal structure. He was not wrong in any of this, precisely. That was exactly what made it difficult. When he finished, the floor was open for responses. Several delegates spoke. 2 supported the reprimand. 1 called for a modified response, a formal reprimand instead of a full reprimand combined with consideration of the treaty's level classification system by a committee. 2 more spoke at length about the Nullorn threat and argued that the situation had completely changed the calculus. Then Delegate Junicha stood up. Today, she was not at the back. Before the session, she had submitted a formal motion under Union procedural rules, requesting that the human delegation be granted temporary front-row status for the duration of this specific session. The motion required approval from 6 council members. She received approval from 18 of them, 8 from secondary and mid-level species whose names surprised no one, and 3 from delegations of the elder races whose names surprised everyone. She stood at the lectern in the center of the hall, on the same floor where Yara Asai had stood 17 times, on the same floor where the word denied had been said 17 times in 4 minutes or less. Cha looked at the council without visible nervousness. She had been preparing for this for a long time, not for this specific moment. She could not have predicted this specific moment exactly. But for a moment like this, the one that comes once in a career if you are very patient, very careful, and very clear about what you are trying to do, I want to talk about the treaty, she said. In particular, I want to talk about why it exists. She paused, establishing eye contact with parts of the hall that needed to feel seen before they would actually listen. "The Treaty of Vassalage was created," she said, "to protect galactic stability from the danger of young civilizations acquiring military power before they gained the wisdom to use it responsibly. That was the stated goal. I am not going to argue with the goal. The goal is reasonable." She paused again. "But the treaty was also written by civilizations that had already secured their own safety. It was written by species that already had ships, weapons, and level classifications, which the treaty then protected. They did not write rules for themselves. They wrote rules for everyone who would come after." Several elder delegates stirred in their seats. Cha continued. "The question the treaty was never intended to answer," she said, "is what happens when the structure the treaty was supposed to protect, the structure of the Union itself, is faced with a threat that existing Union forces cannot stop alone." She looked at the tactical display installed at the front of the hall, showing recorded data from the Battle of Katara. "We have lost 5 united fleets to the Nullorn. Katara was the first engagement of all 5 where the Nullorn advance was stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Katara still stands. 2 billion people are still alive. This happened because one ship appeared that shouldn't have existed, and did what no one expected." She took her notebook from the lectern. "I want to read a list," she said. Several delegates in the hall recognized the phrase. They had heard it from her before, 2 weeks ago in this same hall, and they remembered what it contained. Some sat a little straighter. "This is a different list," Cha said. "It is a list of every Union member species that, at some point in its history, requested a level classification increase after demonstrating significant independent military power." She began to read, "The Bretts, who petitioned the original Union Council 412 years ago, approved. The Aluns, who petitioned the Council 308 years ago, approved. The Pelhari." She read 22 names. All of them were elder races or mid-level species now considered full and valuable members of the Union. Each of them had, at some point, demonstrated ability first, and then asked for recognition. She put down the notebook. "We built the Prometheus because we needed to survive," she said. "We deployed it because others needed to survive. If this is a crime under the treaty, then this list of 22 species committed the same crime, and this council approved their reclassification one way or another because the Union always eventually recognized ability when it was demonstrated. That is what we are asking you to do now." She froze for a moment. Then she said the last thing what she had saved because it needed to be heard at the end, after everything else, when the hall was already thinking about all of it. "You have told us for 17 years that we are not ready," she said. "You told us we are impulsive, unstable, too young, too emotional. You said that giving us warships is like giving a child a plasma cutter. I stand here today to tell you that the child you described does not exist. There exists a species that for 40 years built something in secret, in the dark, at enormous cost, with no guarantee that it would ever be used, because we believed the day would come when it would be needed. That is not impulsive, that is not unstable. That is by any measure exactly the kind of patient long-term commitment to survival that you claim to respect in senior civilizations." She looked directly at Sue. "We are not asking for your forgiveness," she said. "We are telling you who we are, and asking if the Union intends to recognize it." She sat down. The hall was very quiet. The motion for a reprimand failed. It didn't fail by a narrow margin. It failed by 29 votes to 18, with 9 abstentions. That was a clear result by the standards of the Union Council, where close votes were more common than clear ones. The motion for reclassification that followed, introduced by the Garrot delegation and signed by 11 others, passed by 31 votes to 14. Humanity was reclassified to Level 2 in the shortest reclassification hearing in Union history. The vote was held on the same day without delays for review committees or official study periods, because every delegate in the room had just seen the video of the battle, listened to Cha's speech, and for those who voted against reclassification privately understood where it was all going. High Arbiter Sue officially registered his objection for the record. He spoke no more during the session. In the corridor outside the hall after the session, 3 delegates from different species, a representative of the Garrot, a Tauran delegate named Vasit, and, to the considerable surprise of everyone who saw it, a junior member of the Alun delegation approached Cha and asked for a private meeting. The Alun delegate quietly said that their delegation had been considering some proposals regarding joint partnerships in ship construction and felt that now might be a suitable time for their discussion. Cha said she would be happy to schedule a meeting. She waited until they had walked away before allowing herself one small, private smile. Then she took out her personal communicator and sent a message to Yara consisting of 2 words. We won. The Prometheus and Vil project was declassified 10 days after the reclassification vote. The decision was made by the Solar Assembly, and it was an easy decision. There was no point in secrecy anymore. The entire galaxy had seen the Prometheus fight. The question was not whether to reveal the project, but how. The Assembly decided to do it simply. A full public release of the project's history, its development, its personnel, its costs, and its achievements. Everything from the first unauthorized design meeting 40 years ago to the Battle of Katara. The release included the names of everyone who had ever worked on Iroh and Vil, thousands of names, engineers and scientists, pilots and logistics staff, administrative personnel and security teams, medical staff, and a dozen other categories of people who had spent part or all of their careers working in secret on something they could never talk about. Quan's name was on the list, as was Arvis's. There were also the names of people who had worked at Iroh and Vil and then moved on. People who had given 30 years and never returned to the surface, and people who had died before the ship's completion and never saw what they helped build. The reaction was significant. On Earth, there were public celebrations in several cities, not official ones with organized parades, but spontaneous ones. As people gathered in squares and streets because they wanted to be together when they heard something that changed their understanding of the world. On other worlds, the reaction was different but also noticeable. On Garrett Prime, the video of the Prometheus fighting at Katara was broadcast on public screens in major population centers, and the commentary accompanying it wasn't the usual analytical Union discourse. It was simpler. People just watched the ship fight. On Brett Prime, the reaction was more reserved. But the incident report by the Brett commander, which had been submitted through official channels and included in the Iroh and Vil declassification package, was reproduced in full in 3 different Brett news outlets. The line about tactical sophistication over 32 years of service was the most quoted. The Brett commander, who hadn't authorized the public release of the report, read the material in his cabin aboard the Eternal Dominion, which was now undergoing repairs at the Ura assembly point. He read with the special stillness of a man waiting to know how he felt about something. He wasn't angry at the publication. He had written the truth, and he had known when he wrote it that the truth has a habit of going where it isn't invited. He also started reading the technical files of Iroh and Vil the next day, which had been transferred to senior Union military commanders as part of the reclassification process. He read about the redundant power systems, the adaptive weapon configuration capability, about Vigil. He read about the old Earth naval doctrine that Tomas Adami had adapted for modern space combat, and he discovered, to his annoyance and then to his interest, that the underlying logic was sound, and that he had never thought to apply it himself, only because no one in Brett military education had ever pointed to a 1,000-year-old ocean warship and said, "This is still worth knowing." He took notes. He didn't think he would be contacting the Prometheus directly. That would be too much to ask, perhaps for himself and for Asai. But he thought that when the Joint Tactical Review Committee was assembled, and it would be, now that reclassification had passed, joint committees always followed, he would volunteer to join it. There were things, he thought carefully, that 32 years of service in the Brett had not taught him. It wasn't a comfortable thought, but he had spent his career learning to sit with uncomfortable truths when the evidence demanded it. The evidence demanded it. Yara Asai was officially given her rank 3 weeks after the reclassification, not by the Solar Assembly, which had technically already registered her resignation, but by the Union Council itself, which had a rare procedure for awarding ranks to officers of non-standard status in emergency circumstances. The rank was awarded with a new rank designation that Union translators interpreted as something close to Fleet Admiral, a title that carried authority over several vessels. She accepted it in a short, quiet ceremony in a conference room on Verret Prime, in the presence of Cha and a large group of official Union figures. There were no speeches. There was a handshake with the Jurat delegate who had introduced the motion for reclassification and a brief formal exchange of words, and then she had her rank, and that was all. She was official, and on the record, the first human officer to hold a command rank recognized by the full Union Council. 3 more Prometheus-class ships were immediately ordered. The designs had been ready for years. Quan had taken care of that, anticipating the possibility that more ships would be needed by designing the Prometheus as a template, not a unique project. The new ships would be built openly at the Iro and Ville facility, which was no longer secret, with human engineers working in the sight of the entire galaxy. 2 of the 3 new ships were built in partnership with other Union species. The Garat contributed their expertise in materials science, which led to an improved hull alloy that was lighter and stronger than the original. The Tauren, who turned out to have developed a targeting algorithm very compatible with Vigil's architecture, contributed to a significant upgrade of the AI system on all 4 ships. This was not the way Iro and Ville had imagined the future. They had imagined fighting for permission, or fighting while still unauthorized, or fighting alone. They hadn't imagined they would be asked to provide blueprints. But the Union was afraid, and afraid people, even powerful ones, eventually stop asking who has the right to help and start asking who can. The Nullorn threat did not end after Katara. Everyone knew it wouldn't. In the months that followed, there were 3 more engagements in the outer sectors. The Prometheus was present at 2 of them. In both cases, the United Force performed better than in any previous engagement. Not because the Prometheus itself was the decisive factor, but because the Union fleet had watched the battle video, read the Brett commander's report, attended joint tactical review committees, and started asking different questions about how to fight an enemy that adapts. They started thinking outside the box. Even if it didn't come easily to them, even if old habits of rigid doctrine continued to reassert themselves and had to be pushed back every time. Vigil's model of Nullorn behavior, updated through many engagements, was shared with all Union fleets. It became the foundation of a new tactical approach that recognized the Nullorn's adaptability and tried to stay ahead of it, rather than seeking a single doctrine that worked and repeating it until the enemy found a solution. The war was long. It would be long. The galaxy understood that now, in a way, it hadn't understood before Katara. But the galaxy was still here. On a gray day on Earth, Quan sat opposite his daughter at a small restaurant in Seoul. It was their first meeting in 8 months after the declassification, after the world knew what her absent, boring father had actually been doing all this time. Her name was Su-won. She was 17, and in the week after the declassification, she had said very little to him about it. She answered his messages. She agreed to this meeting, but she said very little. He was worried about what she thought. They sat with food between them, and for a while, no one spoke. The restaurant was quiet. There was a view from the window, and outside was a gray Seoul day, ordinary and familiar. Then Su-won said, "They really are showing the video everywhere." "Yes," he said. "I watched it," she said a few times. He waited. "Which part did you build?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment, then said, "Most of the engine and power sections, the backup power system, the part that allows her to keep fighting when she was damaged. That was mine." She nodded slowly. She looked at the table. "I was angry," she said after a while. "When I found out, I was angry that you didn't tell me." "I know," he said. "I am sorry." She was silent for a moment. "But then I watched the video again," she said, "and I read some articles about how much time it took. How many people." She looked up at him. "Oh, Katara." She said the word Katara the way people say the names of places where something important happened with a small pause before it, with weight. "You couldn't tell me," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," he said. "I couldn't." She looked at him for a long time. He couldn't fully read her face. She was 17, and she was complicated, like all 17-year-olds. And he had missed so much of her growing up that he had gaps in his understanding of her that would take time to close. Then she very quietly said, "The part you built the backup power is the part that kept the ship alive when it was hit." "Yes, so it's the part that saved Admiral Asai's life." "And 86 other people," he said. She was silent for a moment, then nodded once. A small, clear nod picked up her food and began to eat. And he realized this wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of the understanding that was necessary for forgiveness before it could arrive. He picked up his food, too. They ate together on a gray day, and it was ordinary, and that was enough. The Prometheus was docked at the Verret Prime station when the new ships arrived. Yara was on the bridge at the viewport, looking at the slow movement of traffic around the station. Union warships entering and departing, supply transports, diplomatic transports. It was a view she had imagined in one form or another for a long time. Not in detail, it is impossible to imagine the specific details of what has not yet happened, but the general shape of what she had imagined, which was the direction she had been moving for 30 years. Vigil spoke quietly from the bridge systems around her. "Admiral, I am recording 3 vessels arriving at the outer jump point." She looked at the viewport. The first ship passed through the jump point with the special shimmer of light that meant the end of a transit jump. It was a Prometheus-class ship. She immediately recognized it by its profile, by the shape Quan had spent 19 years protecting. On its hull was written HSV Challenger, printed in the standard font now used on all solar assembly vessels. The second ship passed through 30 seconds later, HSV Indomitable. The last name had been chosen by the joint human-Garrett crew that would operate at one of the partnership ships. Yara had been told the name before the ship was finished, and she thought it was a good name, not a martial name, not a name about strength or domination or challenge, a name about what happens when different types of people decide to face the same problem together. Vigil spoke again. "Challenger is on the comms. They are requesting our position and asking, 'Do you require escort?'" Yara looked at the 3 ships approaching the station. 1 built by humans, 2 partnership ships. All of them carried Vigil systems, backup power, reconfigurable weapon mounts. Everything that 40 years of secret work had brought. She thought about what to say. She thought about the Crystal Hall and the 17 denials. She thought about Sue's face. She thought about the laughter from the gallery. She thought about Quan in the engine room with his cold tea, and Arva smiling in the depths of Titan, and Petra intentionally playing fear, and Tomas with his old Earth books, and Vigil saying ready, and the silence of Iroh and Vil, and Cha standing at the lectern reading 41 names in a room that had never expected to have to listen to her. She thought about all of it. Then she said, "Vigil, tell Challenger that we appreciate the offer." "Yes, Admiral." "And tell them that we will escort them." Vigil transmitted the message. The 3 new ships adjusted their approach to stand alongside the Prometheus. All 4 moved together toward the Verret Prime station, through a galaxy that had spent 100 years deciding that humanity was too young, too unstable, and too small to matter. The ships moved under human colors in the full light of an alien star openly, officially, with the support of the Union behind them. Not because the Union had given them permission to exist, but because they existed anyway, in the dark, for 40 years, until the day came when the galaxy needed them. They hadn't asked for the day, they had simply been ready for it, and that, in the end, was everything.